Well, there we go. Tell me why.
Because we actually have, we're not starting cold here, right? I mean, it's not we're 5-year-olds exploring aware of reality. We have millions of man hours of work that has constructed some very successful models and methodologies for actually discovering the unknown. And to the point where to actually make large changes to that, it becomes progressively more unlikely. In other words, once millions of minds have actually sort of scrutinized these problems, to actually come up with a completely different understanding of it is more like it's far more likely that you are wrong or that you've misunderstood the situation rather than you've actually come up with some genius insight. This is where Dawa Films goes off the deep end, is he thinks that he is, at his age, you know, some, I don't know, how old do you think the guy is, 20 something, that he's got this fabulous insight into epistemology, philosophy, and all this other sort of thing. That's just, I mean, it's not impossible, but it's vastly unlikely. I mean, yeah, there are people who sort of study this all their lives.
If you took issue with me by saying that there is such a thing as extraordinary evidence, then tell me what the difference between evidence and extraordinary evidence is.
Well, for instance, if I mean, all right, so you're right, the extraordinary evidence is a subsection of subsection. Right?
It's not. But let me explain my point so you understand what I'm saying.
Well, okay, DPR. No, let me reverse that. What's the difference between a claim and an extraordinary claim? One's just a subsection of the other.
Well, I don't.
Right?
It's a subsection.
And if you like, the extraordinary claims require extraordinary evidence. I don't have a problem.
Yeah, but I think it's a superfluous adjective, and I don't like it. And let's go back.
Well, in which case, all claims, extraordinary claims, is superfluous.
Yes, I agree. It's a claim. The word extraordinary doesn't really add anything to it. In the same way, I mean, people think that there is some sort of like hierarchy of evidence in courts, and they think, oh, well, I've got a forensic evidence here. I mean, it's a little bit comparison to arguments and say, oh, yes, but this is a philosophical argument. And they expect that by putting that adjective before it, it suddenly becomes a better argument. No, it remains an argument. Putting forensic before evidence still means it's evidence. Putting extraordinary before claim still means it's a claim. I just think that it's superfluous. And as I say, all I would require, for example, the claim that a God exists or a supernatural entity exists, you could say, well, it's an extraordinary claim. Well, that doesn't add anything. It's a claim. All I require is evidence. And they can't produce it, which is why they end up in
DPR. I mean, look at the comments. DNA, videotape, photo, witness, anecdote. You know, there is a hierarchy to these things.
No, there isn't.
If you're going to make bold claims, you need it to be backed up by something significant.
Extraordinary evidence. DPR, you're talking with your mic muted. You're pulling an R on.
I'm doing an Aaron, except he does it in reverse. I'm sorry, it's all evidence. If it's admissible evidence, it's evidence that the jury can take into consideration. Do you think for a moment that there are cases in which DNA...
DPR, I think we've hit the semantic limit. Okay, DPR, we've hit the semantic limit here.
No,
let's get back to the actual guts of the question.
Let me finish this.
I don't want to discuss. I don't want to discuss the difference between claims and extraordinary claims. I want to discuss the actual point that the guy raised.
Fair enough.
Semantical limit notwithstanding, I think that the point of the phrase extraordinary claims require extraordinary evidence is to convey the idea that the evidence should be proportional to the requirement left by the claim. You understand? If you have a claim and it can be reasonably established that 3 out of 3 I must be drunk. 3 out of 3 things, if they're true, mean that it is highly likely that the claim is accurate, and 2 of the 3 are already established. This is usually how people establish what is an exceptional and an unexceptional claim. People say, well, if you only have 1 out of 3 left, it's not that exceptional. unless the third is something highly rare or bizarre or unseen or unheard of. But if you have 0 out of 3, then you have more of your work cut out for you. So it is subjective. There is a bit of an analog basis to it, but I think that there's still a very important principle being conveyed in that, you know, you should stack as many items of evidence as is necessary to reach the shelf on which your claim is resting.
Indeed, you know, what this guy is actually suggesting, the guts of this question, you know, what if, just say for the sake of argument, a pineapple just appears out of nowhere? Well, you've got an observation, right? But that observation doesn't come at you out of the blue. What you got to do is integrate that into these millions of man hours of work that have gone into constructing robust models, and in all likelihood, if you were doing if you did see a magical pineapple just appear out of nowhere, what is the proposed? What are you going to propose? That it's supernatural, or that it's something you don't understand, or it's trickery? Right? I mean, it's far more likely that it's trickery, or you know, you've made a mistake, in that it is just so incompatible with what we know about reality. And in this sense, if you're actually going to propose something extraordinary, like it's the supernatural, you want something more than I just saw a pineapple appear out of nowhere.
Well, in his defense, he did say a banana, not a pineapple. But I think it raises an important point as to, well, I don't know, I guess at its core, it's kind of a semantical point in that when a new phenomenon that had been classically been considered the realm of the supernatural, if it were to come to our notice as being true, repeatable, testable, ironclad, even if we have no idea how it actually works, I think that I would be tempted to say that it is now an official member of the club of natural processes, no matter how bizarre it might seem. That is, if there is such a thing as magic, I would say that magic would be part of nature, and it was just one that no one has been able to repeatably and testably, empirically, been able to tap into these kinds of forces.
I do, whilst we're waiting for next caller who doesn't seem to want to answer the phone, I do want to just briefly go back to an issue that was raised in relation to hierarchy of evidence and this idea that DNA evidence or forensic evidence is at a higher level. Do you not seriously think that you have cases in which you have 2 experts giving quite conflicting views and totally opposite? I mean, the idea that forensic evidence is per se of a higher level than eyewitness evidence is a nonsense. There are cases in which it can be. There are also cases in which eyewitness testimony is absolutely devastating and far more convincing to a jury than forensic evidence, which is being argued about by 2 experts. Okay, Klingshaw, welcome to the show.
Thank you. For a moment there, I realised I was doing an Aaron Ra. I left my mic on. Sorry about that. With Dawa Films and his argument, just before I get into my actual main point, just interesting to note that he really is relying on the cultural presupposition of God. We all sort of know and understand, but generally we think we do, what God is, and we sort of, it's how he really almost gets away with what he's saying. But if you interchange in his argument every time he says God with magic unicorn, it just exposes how ridiculous his argument is. Like, sorry, up in my throat. Like, you know, everyone innately believes in a magical unicorn. I don't have to provide any evidence. You have to provide, like, it makes it quite ridiculous. And I think this really keys into the problem of the idea of God in general, in that in his video, he states that a lot of atheists wouldn't accept evidence for God anyway, and that if an amputee magically healed their arm, they would cite other causes rather than God. And I actually agree with that. I would not. It's like with the Quran miracles. I wouldn't therefore say if there was actually advanced science in the Quran that it's from God. I would not make that leap.
Well, I think they're very interesting. Let me just pause you there to throw in my tuppence worth on that. I think that that if such a thing happened, then all we could say about it is we do not know how that happened. And what seems to be the case, and what seems to have been the case in history, is that that which was not known was filled, those gaps were filled with the idea of a deity. I've always found that to be a totally unsatisfactory answer because it doesn't actually answer anything at all. All we could say about it is we don't know how that has happened. Let's look into it and see what we can find out. Not make that jump that you just referred to. Oh, well, that means there must be a God.
Yeah, I think it probably even is a non sequitur logical fallacy to just assume that an amputee's arm healed, therefore God exists. I mean, it doesn't follow. And I think it really keys into the problem of the whole problem with the idea of God to begin with. I mean, it's almost by definition cannot be proven to exist, or it just, I mean, stand back, pretend you've never heard of the idea of God and pretend someone is explaining it to you, like the modern idea of God, not the original idea where God was actually a physical being in the cloud or up on Mount Olympus or whatever, but the modern fluffy idea. It's an incoherent mess. He's all merciful and he's all just. I mean, that's logically contradictory. There's all these logically contradictory attributes about him, and then it just, I think
I have to interrupt you. I'm sorry. We'll come back to that in a second. I'm getting breaking news from Mrs. Ra. They are at the wedding. We can stream it. We will be going live to Matt Dillahunty's wedding in about 50 minutes time. So for those that have come along to watch the wedding, you're not going to be disappointed. Can't guarantee what the quality is going to be like, and I'm going to have to try and sort out exactly what's going on. But there we go. Had to interrupt you. I'm sorry. Breaking news.
No problem.
But yes, I agree with you. Did anyone else want to comment?
Yeah, I mean, if you just say, for instance, ghosts, you know, if you're going to play these sort of funny hypothetical games, you can as well play them on things that are sort of plausible, as in there has never been someone who grew their limb back. You know, there have been toads and such, like they grow their limbs back, but we don't call that a miracle, you know, because we understand the sort of developmental biology of all of this. But if you just replace it with, say, ghosts or space aliens, you know, if you saw a ghost, would you then believe in ghosts? The answer is probably not, because, you know, we have millions of man-hours of work that have actually constructed some fairly robust models of reality. And ghosts really don't fit into that terribly well, to the point where if you're going to propose something extraordinary like ghosts, you really want something more than I saw something I don't fully understand.
And just to, oh, sorry, Atheismo, you go.
In addition to this, there's this completely erroneous leap that's being made that, first of all, if somebody grew their arm back, if a human being grew back their arm in the same manner that, you know, an amphibian, like you said, can grow back its arm, does he or anyone else really think that the atheists of the world would say, nah, I'm sure it's nothing, let's just ignore it? I mean, really, from atheists that I know, we, of all people, would be at the edge of our seats waiting for the latest updates of this situation. I mean, I would think it was fascinating if the example that, I forget what our guest was who gave us this example of conjuring up a banana with witchcraft. I think that would be amazing. It would open up an entire new frontier of human knowledge. So I don't know what they think of us, that we think that we would hear of someone demonstrably, a before and after of them being, you know, missing an arm and regrowing one, and we just roll our eyes and go about our day. That is absolutely not what would happen. Second of all,
sorry, do go on.
No, go ahead.
I was just going to add to that, you know, the idea that we are so close-minded that if evidence of a God came to us, we would reject that out of hand just because we don't like the idea of believing in gods. No, I think it'd be absolutely fascinating. I don't actually particularly like the idea of Yahweh existing because I think that he's a vindictive, nasty piece of shit. But, you know, the gods of Greek mythology, Zeus and the pantheon of gods that he associated with, I'd love to see some evidence of that. I wouldn't have a problem believing in them. But no, all we need is evidence, and you know, if the evidence is there, we would believe it.
Has anyone seen the movie Horrible Bosses? There's this part where this old man who founded this business, he dies, and his cokehead son takes over the business. And I think that that would be how I would feel if I found out that any of the world's religions turned out to be true in terms of the existence of their gods, whether it be the Greek gods and that model where they were admittedly fickle and often tortured mortals for no reason, or whether it be the Abrahamic God who also tortured and killed mortals for no particular reason. It would be like finding out that the cokehead son of the boss was now in charge of the company. It would be this sinking feeling knowing that you are utterly powerless in the face of this self-described sociopathic and insecure being with the power to smite you at will. I mean, it would be horrible, but that doesn't mean that I would just deny it. But I want to get back to this, the erroneous jump between the regeneration of a limb and the existence of a god. Obviously, if someone regenerates a limb, that's a highly unusual phenomenon, but we want to know more. You shouldn't jump to any conclusion at all, no matter how.
Yep. Scientists thrive on the unknown.
What you said about if you saw a ghost, would you believe in ghosts? Maybe, but if I saw a ghost, it wouldn't cause me to believe in demons. If I saw a leprechaun, it wouldn't cause me to believe in Japanese fox spirits. It's just, how are these things so intertwined in their minds? If it could be, if this scenario were possible, it could be that the regrowth of a limb could be one string that, if we kept pulling on it long enough, would eventually reveal other supernatural phenomena, possibly culminating in the existence of a discovery of a deity. But the whole point is you don't jump to these kinds of conclusions, otherwise you contaminate your data before you even have it in hand.
I know it's a somewhat semantic
but it's even worse than that, because the way that Dawa Film starts this video is by saying that so God's supernatural, so he has no footprint in reality, therefore using science to try and discover God, it will never work. And this sort of, well, actually no, if there were a supernatural God and he could interface with reality, then he would leave footprints everywhere.
Well, this is a semantic argument that I was going to pick up with.
Footprints.
So this was the semantic argument I was going to pick up with Almighty on. As soon as you have evidence, it comes out of the realm of supernatural, doesn't it?
I tend to lean that way. I tend to think, okay, if someone, challenges Randy and comes up with an unexplained phenomenon, I think that this new phenomenon essentially joins the club. You understand? It's something that we may not have seen before, but it's even what we would consider miraculous. It's the same as if we graduate something from something that we previously thought impossible, and then we see it happen. Well, we now have to concede that it was possible, and in fact does occur. So I don't, if it exists, if magic is real, then magic itself I would no longer consider to be supernatural. But that doesn't mean that I would refuse to. That doesn't mean that I'd refuse to believe in it. And this whole nonsense, a long time ago, I made a vid, it was the first vid I ever made, and it was about the I Ching divination system. And the only argument I ever got, other than fuck you for not believing in it, was the confirmation bias argument. It's like, well, I used it, and I liked what it said. There's a mystical force, working behind it. And when I said, okay, so you believe in magic sticks, they're like, oh, how dare you say that it's magic sticks? I'm like, well, they're sticks of wood, and there's this mystical force interacting with it. Why do you find it derogatory for me to say that magic sticks are magic sticks? And they just hated that characterization because they found it belittling. But, who wouldn't want some kind of magic or sorcery at their disposal? That's the whole appeal of these things, is they offer this false promise so far of some inside track, some shortcut. You can be wiser than the wisest scholar if you only meditate on a few simple things. There's a very lucrative opportunity there if it were real, and so far it has proven not to be.
Okay, I've joined the. Do carry on. I've joined the next caller. OJ Noid, I don't know, Ojnoid. I'm going to try and find out exactly what's happening with Dillahunty's wedding. So I'm going to make a phone call, and please talk friendly amongst yourselves. I shall be right back.
Okay.
The thing with God in particular is that I'm sure we've all experienced this when a theist will say to us, "Well, what would you accept as evidence for God?" And for me, I mean, when I look at everything that they posit as evidence for God, it just isn't evidence. It's either bullshit. Sorry, I swore. I'm sorry. I mean, it's either nonsense philosophical arguments, or it's these non sequitur logical fallacies about, the Quran is inimitable, therefore God exists, and it's just like so there is actually no evidence for God, so they're proposing something that pretty much doesn't exist or that is logically contradictory. So there is, at the moment, I don't know what would provide evidence for God, because everything that they claim is evidence isn't. So it's almost, to me, it's like they're asking what would be evidence for something that doesn't exist. I mean, it almost can't exist, given it's all merciful and so forth. So and all just. So it's logically contradictory.
The way it
Well,
appears to me
they often...
is that the vast majority of people who actually buy into religion do so for primarily two reasons. First, that it's a social club. It makes them feel good to be part of a group. Second, it makes them feel good in that it's a sort of, there's a real powerful guy and he thinks you're great. He's really on your side. Those are the prime two reasons. All the sort of philosophical stuff that goes on in the background, it's stuff that sort of, how shall I say, reinforces their beliefs. But how many find that the decisive factor in whether they believe or don't? I think it's comparatively small. But if you like, by addressing these things, you do undermine, this positive reinforcement thing.
Well,
there's a lot of fear as well. I don't know if any of you have seen Great Big Balls videos where he talks about his deconversion, and he says that he had the kind of, well, he had a slightly more difficult upbringing than most, but he was basically indoctrinated. And then when he started to, come to his senses, he was prevented at first from exploring the evidence because of the fear of hell.
Well, with Thunderfoot, with what you were saying in particular, this is very interesting. I don't know if this has parity with what I believe, but I also have two. I believe there's two fundamental reasons why people are religious, and I wonder if these are the same two reasons, because I phrased them differently, or whether this is different. The first one would be identity. Religion, for many people, forms the fundamental basis and starting point for their identity as a person, and indeed as a community, and from what they were raised as a child, or simply as an identity that they have grabbed onto and added as an adult. From, for example, Christopher Hitchens was a communist. But then this worldview fell apart and he became a neoconservative. So sometimes people change their identity for another. So in that case, someone might change their identity for the identity of being a Muslim. So the first reason, in my opinion, is identity. The second is emotion, afraid of death, wanting to live forever, this kind of thing, emotional consolation. And yeah. So this is the fundamental reason why people become religious. And then you're totally right. They just, like the Quran miracles, it's just adding these extra nonsense onto a top as an ex post facto retrospective justification and defense around the real fact of the matter, and that is that it's only for emotional reasons or foundational identity reasons. I think
yeah, I mean, no one's ever actually converted because of the cosmological argument or whatever.
Well, I'm going to interrupt very briefly. Just got off the phone with Aaron. It appears that they have managed to find a way of overcoming the technical difficulties that we had before. When this program finishes, we will be going live to Texas to join Aaron Ra, Matt Dillahunty, and others for Matt's wedding. So just wanted to say that. Do carry on. I'm sorry to interrupt.
I think, Clinshaw, that we are primarily in agreement. What you would call the identity is essentially the it's the football team religion. It's what you identify with. And the second one is the emotional. Yes, I agree completely. With Islam, there are, if you like, significant social factors once you get up to market dominance. And these are, I think, reasons why you get these very top-heavy Islamic populations. The Islamic populations tend to be 90 or so percent plus Islamic. And I think those factors go, they're part of the religion that you, first of all, you have to pray 5 times a day, which makes it very hard to leave. And then you get these factors that if you are practicing the attribute of the faith where you execute people who leave, then obviously that puts a damp, not only is it not only is getting killed a significant deterrent, but for those who are not killed, who are thinking about deconverting, it's a significant deterrent. And I think it's reasons like that that you actually get the Islamic countries tend to be very top-heavy. They are very good at maintaining market dominance.
Well, the thing with Islam is that, I mean, with traditional Islam, I mean, now in the modern era, you've got people with a lot of people with their own modernistic interpretations, but traditionally, and this is still true for a very large, well, I don't know the statistics, so I can't say, but I think for a lot of people, is that in its early years, Islam, unlike Christianity, which was a religion of theology and belief and so forth, Islam does contain that, but Islam is a religion of law. In the early years, the jurists formulated law after law after law about everything, not just stuff like apostasy, but also how long can you grow your beard and how should you go to the toilet, how do you pray, everything.
You do know about like the Jewish law in the Old Testament, right?
Sure, but 600 commandments about what to do with livestock when you steal.
Yes.
So to begin with, Christianity kind of, one of the major draws of Christianity, I think, was the fact that you don't have to follow all those anymore. But Judaism started exactly the same way.
But the difference is that with Judaism is that after the fall of the original Jewish states, it was all theoretical. It was the rabbis theorizing under Muslim or Christian rule. It was only, but with Islam, they had direct control and power, and so all of this stuff was implemented, and so for 1,000 years they've been implementing these laws about how to live your entire life, and so there is with the community aspect and the identity. I mean, it isn't just apostasy. It's everything. I mean, and this is, I mean, Sharia doesn't mean law per se. Sharia means the Islamic way, in that it covers more than just the law. It's everything. It's the way you pray, the way you dress, blah blah blah. So I think this is a total, and possibly even you could say a totalitarian system, where everything in your life, there's the jurists have made laws and precedents and so forth on how to do that. So I think that. With Islam, that's really a strong reason why it's so difficult to leave the religion.
Well,
can I just make one suggestion whilst you answer this, Almighty? And I suspect this topic may be more relevant to your show. Do you want to firstly tell us about your show, where you see it, when it's on, what the topics are, and then I'm going to move on and try and squeeze in a few more callers.
Klingshore and Rationalizer had the idea for a sort of sister show to the MSS, but with more of a focus on Islam, because when Rash and I started coming on the show more and more, and we would talk sort of equal parts Christianity and Islam, apparently they got a lot of feedback that they wanted a show that's primarily focused on Islam, and so that's what we do now. And our first show, actually, I thought was really terrific. We got we had great discussion overall, and we have a great panel, and we got some really good callers, and I think we talked at length about how the show went, and I think the real triumph was in the Muslim callers, because we spent the early half of the show talking about VFX and then later Dawa films. I think that I want people to see the show not just for the criticisms of Islam, but people need to know that Dawa Films and people like him are not typical. You know, no matter what our disagreements, you know, not every Muslim is going to be a narcissistic sociopath like him. You know, I mean, just normal people. Just like, you know, we disagree. We butt heads with Christians a lot, but you know, there isn't quite the dehumanization, let's face it, that, you know, often occurs between the two cultural spheres where these different major world religions are practiced. So,
I think,
you know,
I think that most people would
hopefully-
probably accept this argument. That is to say that the large proportion of Muslims, probably in the same way as the large majority of Christians, don't actually really believe everything that's said. It's a label that's been attached to them, which they adopt and accept and don't do anything about.
Yeah, but I mean, if you were just to take a look at, say, you know, deconversion rates, I'll wager, you know, the on paper deconversion rates are lower in Islam than they are in Christianity.
Okay,
Well, that
wait a
may well
minute.
be true.
I think that a lot more people leave Islam quietly for the reasons that you
Yes.
listed.
Oh, yes.
delineated
Secret.
earlier.
Yeah.
I mean, we had people.
And that's so symptomatic of the actual attributes of the religion. Yeah.
I think that there's going to be a massive depressurization when they sort of turn this corner to the point where you're safe from repercussion, either from the government, from vigilantism, or even from ostracization.
Before we
But
one
no,
second,
no, let me
please,
just make one quick
second.
point.
Before we move too far down that line, my only point was this: that I suspect that Dawa Films is not representative of the majority of Muslims in the same way as PCS is not representative of the majority of Christians. That's the only point that I was seeking to make. Sorry to interrupt you, Thunder.
Yeah, but having interrupted me now, I've forgotten what I was going to say.
Well, just on the thing with the apostasy, what's happening now is that initially, right, traditionally, and this is based on what Muhammad said and what the Muhammad's successors, the Khalifas, said, the punishment for apostasy was death. But that now what some jurists are saying is that it's not death unless they're very public about it. So this is pathetic, but it's at least it's that we can see a slow move towards a more liberal stance and a more accepting stance. So slowly, too slowly, that is happening. So yeah.
I remember now. Yeah. Okay. So I mean, I agree with Almighty that, you know, that if you were to get to a tipping point, I think that you know, it's the equivalent of revolution. You get a metastable state and it sort of flips. But you have to bear in mind that in places like Pakistan, I don't see that tipping point as even being on the radar. In that not only are they actually sentencing people to death, which again, these are symptomatic of the police held within the country, but those who actually try and reform the religious beliefs or how they are exercised. One of the guys who was sort of saying, no, we shouldn't be executing people for blasphemy. Yes, was one of the politicians, was actually shot dead by his security detail, who was then actually sort of heralded as a hero by those who want the hard line in Islam. And it's also one of those things, yeah, that when I actually had the FBI around, they actually went into some detail about the psychology of a lot of these folks. And what they said is that one thing about Islam is they are very hard. Right? If you like, I, as just a godless guy, I'm sort of no one compared to someone like Dawa Films, who is actually seen as someone who was a Muslim, but has essentially subverted the message. Right? They are harder. They see him as the true apostate, whereas I'm just a non-believer.
Yes. It's the whole thing of about treason and betraying the true cause. I mean, people always, for some reason, like for example, with anti-Muslim bigots, they hate Muslims, but for some reason they reserve special vitriol for apologists for Islam and for these race traitors or these cultural traitors that they, or as they perceive. And you see with the Communist Party in Russia, with all the purges they had, and for some reason there's an obsession in ideologies with traitors and with betraying the cause.
I think we may have moved slightly off the topic that the caller wanted to join in, and he is being very, very polite and sitting quietly in the background. Let's bring him back into
That's
the
fine.
foray.
Oh, can I just quickly say that the Gin and Tonic show will be 9 p.m. GMT. Okay, sorry, continue.
Thank you. OJ, back to you.
Okay. There was one thing I want to say quickly about Ikri, if you don't mind me regressing the conversation a load.
Not at all. Do carry on.
The weird thing is that DPR, you take basically the same position that I've seen a lot of Christian apologists take, but kind of from the opposite direction. They say that, no, evidence is just evidence, and therefore we should accept all these, whimsical textual claims of miracles and stuff. The way that I see it is kind of extraordinary claims requiring extraordinary evidence is kind of like a convenient shorthand for saying that if you have a claim which contradicts stuff we know already and has a big evidence base behind it, or depends on something else which you haven't got any evidence for, you have to have additional evidence to explain that before you can consider the extraordinary claim.
I think in a way this goes back to what Thunderfoot was saying, that if you make a claim that is beyond what we accept and understand now, then you need extraordinary evidence. Yeah. And if that is the way in which the term is being used, then I suppose I would agree with it. I also suspect that one of the problems with coming out with a statement like that is one of a lot of people's heroes, Carl Sagan, actually used that term expressly. If you're making an extraordinary claim, you need extraordinary evidence, and it may just be a semantic difference.
It does. The annoying thing is that if you come out with it in a serious debate, people look down on it because extraordinary is a subjective thing and therefore we can't use it. But I
would go further and say it's superfluous. A claim is a claim and evidence is evidence. But I can understand Thunder's point. But
the key thing is contradicting existing strongly evidenced knowledge.
Yes, which is what Thunder, I think, was saying. Yeah.
Okay.